to Just Plain Wrong, the podcast where three Mennonite librarians discuss depictions of Amish, Mennonites, and other plain groups in popular culture. This week we will be discussing An Amish Husband for Tillie by Amy Lillard. And yes, before you ask, we did choose this book predominantly because it had the name Tillie in the title. However, before we get into the book itself, here's a bit more info about the author. Amy Lillard describes her interest in writing Amish fiction with this paragraph from her Goodreads page. I have always been intrigued with the Amish culture, their gentle ways, and slower-paced lifestyle, and I love the fact that they stay married for their lifetime. But until recently, I never thought to blend this interest with my penchant for romance. Okay, I'm a bit old-fashioned and even enjoy the gender roles that are present in this culture. I love to cook and take care of my family. Yes, that's me, June Cleaver with a laptop. End quote. We will unpack all of that a little bit later, but let's just say the book reflects her interests. She has been writing romance since 2012 and enjoys traveling to various Amish communities for research. For our opening question this week, we thought about a number of different things and honestly weren't feeling super creative, so let's just talk about spring and Easter. So, Tillie, why don't you start?
I have been enjoying spring and picking daffodils and remembering that the sun exists, which for some reason I forget every winter. One of the things that I look forward to every spring is Mennonite and Eastery, and that is making egg cheese. And egg cheese is a particular type of kind of farmer's cheese or Easter cheese, similar to pashka, like you would get in Russian and Ukrainian food around Easter. The version that I make is unique to Waterloo County, Ontario, Old Order Mennonites, which is egg and buttermilk and milk and salt, and you strain it, and then you pour the lightest maple syrup you can find over it, and it is delicious. And I am pleased to have had some this week.
I think I've only had egg cheese once, and it was when you brought some into work way back when, before COVID, and when we all still worked at the same place. I do remember it being delicious. Well, I mean, who doesn't love spring? In the Midwest, winter can just be so blah and cold. I do get to see the sun a bit more here in Indianapolis than I did when I lived in Goshen. Though spring does always remind me that I am literally allergic to everything. So along with being, enamored with the blooms and the green grasses, I sneeze and itch all over. So that's always fun. But I don't really have any special foods or any activities coming up, but I do get my first vaccine shot tomorrow. So I guess that of anything else, I'm looking forward to that more than anything right now.
Woo-hoo!
So yes,
Yay,
I'm very
vaccines!
thankful. So yes, thankful and relieved that is on the horizon.
Yeah, that is wonderful. I'm just really ready to be outside without a coat. I'm just ready. I'm ready for that whole season. I was trying to think of something that could maybe tie into a little bit more of a Mennonite perspective. And something that also I'm excited about is that this spring, both my kids will be old enough to ride in the bike trailer. So I am hopeful that maybe I might get to swap out the car and do my commute via bike once the weather gets a little bit warmer. Let's dive in to An Amish Husband for Tillie, because as we all know, we wouldn't want any other type of husband for Tillie.
I do have to note that when I looked at the rest of the books in this series, none of them had the word Amish in the title.
That is interesting. Just An Amish Husband.
So the other books in this series that precede this one are A Home for Hannah, A Love for Leah, A Family for Gracie, and then it hops to An Amish Husband for Tillie, which I think is kind of erratic. But I guess it is worth noting that Tillie is specifically looking to stay in the Amish and needs an Amish husband. So it's not the most egregious slapping of the word Amish into a title that I've seen.
It's true. All right, so this is the short little summary. So in case you didn't have a chance to read this book for yourself, Tillie Gingrich runs away with her boyfriend Melvin to live the English life. However, when she gets pregnant, she decides that she needs to return home to her family. However, she waits until she's 8 months pregnant to do so. Once home, she fears the inevitable shunning that will occur if Melvin does not return and marry her, but yet she hopes to just spend Christmas with her family. During a surprise Mississippi snowstorm, she runs away from her family and gives birth at the home of a handsome Amish widower, Levi. Tillie and Levi share an immediate connection, and Tillie and her baby are all set to fill in for Levi's dead wife and child until suddenly Melvin returns. Turns out he is willing to return to the Amish and marry Tillie. However, after a heart-to-heart, Melvin and Tillie decide that they don't love each other anymore and that they should just return to the English world and live separate, shunned lives. But before they can announce their decision, Melvin gets crushed by a tree. Very unexpected. And then 2 years later, Tillie and Levi get married. But don't worry, on their wedding day, Tillie confesses to Levi that she fell in love with him way back at their first meeting when she gave birth on his guest bed. It's a Christmas miracle. This book is set in Pontotoc County, Mississippi, which is home to a small community of Swartzendorfer Amish, which is a conservative branch of Old Order Amish. This settlement was started in 1993 and was planted by Amish from Etheridge, Tennessee, which is a larger Old Order Amish community founded in the 1940s. And I found an excellent place for stats. So if any of you are looking for population stats, the Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies at Elizabethtown College has excellent resource there. So this settlement does have 2 districts and a total population of 290 people in 2020. So that's a little bit of background on the setting, but let's go ahead and just start. What was accurate about this book? Tillie.
I thought that the Christmas portion seemed okay. The author got that Christmas is not as big of a deal to Amish people as it is for English people, so that socializing and gift giving may happen, but there's not as much in the way of commercials and trees, decorations, really expensive presents and gifts. It's much more practical. She also does give a shout out to Second Christmas, which is another way that the Amish refer to St. Stephen's Day or Boxing Day or the day after Christmas, the 26th, where that's often used as a day off to go visit family members you didn't see the day before and exchange a few further gifts. So she got some of that right. She didn't really talk much about the religious aspects about it, and she sort of ignored what is arguably a more important date for the Amish around Christmas, which is Epiphany, sometimes called Old Christmas, on January 6th. The Amish do treat Epiphany as a holiday, and it's a fairly sober one. It involves fasting until noon and then visiting community members. So there's mixed results there. Wish you got Christmas partially right. Glowing review, I know.
Yeah, I noted a few things. Most were just sort of little offhand things that she referenced that I was like, oh, okay, she got that right. So early on in the book, there is a very brief mention of a preacher being chosen by lot. It's not elaborated on in any way, but it's at least mentioned. So this is the practice that Amish use for choosing their church leadership. I believe the process is something like they need a preacher, so they ask for nominations. Church members, I'm assuming men only, decide who will be nominated, and then those that are nominated get handed a Bible, and if their Bible has a piece of paper in it, they are the new preacher. I think that sounds so anxiety producing. And while we're going to get into the shunning stuff and how we feel like that's a pretty big inaccuracy, one thing in terms of the family dynamics that I think was accurate is that one of the other sisters, one of Tillie's sisters, had left and joined a Mennonite church, but she was still present at family gatherings, and they were all there together. And I think that's true of large Amish families where some of the children have left the Amish, whether they're Mennonite or not, like they would all still show up at family gatherings, etc. But the thing I actually think she got the most right was not about the Amish at all. It was these details about like newborn babies and how fragile they are. And I was just out in Virginia spending time with my new baby niece. And there's this scene in the book where Tillie's afraid to carry the baby down the stairs because she's still weak from giving birth. And so Levi carries it and is just like really nervous about it. And my brother has a very large wooden staircase. And I felt that, like, as I was carrying my niece up and down the stairs, I was like, if I fall, I will break every bone in my body, but nothing will happen to this baby. I will not let anything happen. So that sort of like fragility you feel around newborns, I thought she did a good job with that.
I would agree with that. And kind of related to something you said there, one thing I found refreshing about this book, because it's been missing in a lot of other books that we've read, was the large family that was extensive, close-knit, lived all in a, like, there was clearly, it was kind of a compound, like they lived very close to each other and were highly involved and engaged in each other's lives. So that felt more accurate. I was also impressed with her description of the community in Pontotoc for what is a relatively small Amish community, and it is also the only one in Mississippi, so it's very small and relatively recent, but it is clear also from the website that the author has visited. Yeah, just a little more accurate in that sense. And we're going to talk more about this later probably as well. I will say there were some real issues with grief and trauma getting very glossed over. However, I did feel in the way that she depicted some of how Levi was handling the fairly fresh death of his wife and the unborn baby had some realism to it. Maybe getting over it as fast as he did, maybe not as realistic, but there were aspects of that grief that felt a little more realistic in how he was handling it. So that kind of brings us to the next question, which is, what was inaccurate? So this might be a slightly longer section. So let's start with you, Erin.
Oh, this will definitely be a longer section. There's just so much, including like the entire premise / central conflict of the book, which is that Tillie returns to this community and is afraid of getting shunned. However, it says in like the opening paragraphs of this book that Tillie never actually joined the church. She and Melvin left and, lived English lifestyles, which means that when she returned, she may have been punished in some way, but they certainly wouldn't have shunned her. Like that wouldn't even have been on the table. I think Tillie, our podcast Tillie, not Tillie the book character, laid this out, I think in our 3rd episode on For Richer or Poorer, like that shunning is something that the Amish use to discipline community members. It's also usually like a last resort. So, they try and come to a resolution in many other ways. Like shunning is really very uncommon, which you would never know if you read a lot of these books, because every other book we read has a shunning plot. So just to reiterate, the whole plot of this book would not not be realistic. I mean, and again, I guess I should say, I'm sure that it would be hard to return to any sort of religiously conservative community as an unwed mother. Like that certainly was a difficult decision that she had to make, and she may have been asked to confess her sins in front of the church, or the church may have pressured her to get married, or any number of things could have happened, but shunning probably would not have been one of them. Okay, so that's the end of that rant. I guess the other thing that really bothered me, even though it's less of an inaccuracy and more of just like a stylistic problem, is that we really don't ever hear why Tillie wants to return to the Amish, other than like it feels right, or quote, it's where she belonged. And I really liked this line. This is for verbatim from the book. She wanted her child raised among the grace and faith of her Amish community, which I found ironic given that she's afraid of being shunned by these same people that she considers forgiving and full of grace and faith throughout the whole book.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, it's not just Tillie's fear. Like the dreaded bishop visit comes, and they are in fact going to, as a single woman, they are going to kick her out, force her to leave her family. Like her immediate family will not be able to care or shelter her. And she will need to go out amongst the English and live with no resources and no money, which seems very intense and unrealistic.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
To expand on something Erin said about grace, the idea that this community will, and I'm quoting here, never forgive her without a husband, is just ridiculous, because she continually is hyping the grace of the Amish church. And like this is a religious group that is known for forgiving, people who murder their children. This is a religious group that has forgiven many, many things infinitely worse than getting confused as a young adult, running away, having a baby, and returning. Like, that is so far down the list of things gone wrong that the idea that they could forgive some of this, but they just choose not to forgive her, makes no sense. There were just a lot of weird other moments too. Like, there were a few times when there were just things that didn't make sense. Like, the children wanted to make Christmas cards and deliver them to the hospitals, specifically the Veterans Hospital, and I was like, this is a group that avoids not only participating in war, but like recognizing anything good about war, or acknowledging holidays like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, because these things are militaristic. So I don't see children wanting to go to a veterans hospital for Christmas. That seemed unlikely. And then there's all sorts of stuff with the other sisters in the family, including one sister who is literally told that she has to give up her teenage son to follow her convictions and marry her former Amish lover. So she's got a teenager, and she had left the Amish, but she's come back. She wants to rejoin the Amish and marry her childhood sweetheart. And instead of bringing this minor with her to live, which admittedly would be weird because he grew up English, she has to transfer custody of her son to the Mennonite sister because the Amish won't let her have custody of her own son. Like, it's maybe that's explained more in the other book that focuses on her, but it made no sense to me.
I thought, Tillie, as a Mennonite, you would know that one of our basic tenets is that we adopt children so that Amish can marry who they want. Like, that's a thing we do. That's like a basic tenet of the Mennonite faith, is like, you want to be almost like the Amish, but have a little more freedom. Join the Mennonites. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
What I wanted to focus on for my little bit of unrealistic was the childbirth scene. So now, again, all sorts of childbirth scenarios are possible. You do not have to give birth in a hospital. And it is true that many Amish choose not to. They use, midwives, birthing centers, giving birth at home. That is something that is present in a lot of Amish communities. Well, first of all, Tillie's decision to go off and wander out into a snowstorm is very suspect, and a little bit of contrived situation going on. So once at Levi's house, she does, of course, go into labor, which she, again, goes into labor by immediately her water breaks, which that is how people give birth in movies. That's not how people actually give birth. And then also, as a first-time mother, she basically just speeds right through all the stages of labor and just immediately goes from like, I'm breaking my water, like water breaks, and I'm having a baby within like 2 hours, which, again, many different births are possible, but on average, that is highly unrealistic. And she's just pretty much chill the whole time. Like, it's a little awkward giving birth to this with a stranger on the guest bed, but she seems chill and births the baby and is just like, also seems to innately understand how all of this works, knows how to handle it, knows when to push, gets that cord cut. Anyways, I was just confused. Let's just put it that way. I was confused with the depiction. And I will say, while the whole concept, and this has been an issue in previous books too, and I think the problem is because frequently babies are a plot point, not an actual thing, which you can tell because while, yes, she did accurately depict the fragile nature and the intense desire to protect newborns, I don't think it's particularly common that newborns present essentially no change to your life. Her newborn essentially just sleeps in a cradle with absolutely no fussing and then eats, and that's it. And I mean, okay, again, maybe that some babies are like that, but I don't think that's typical.
Maybe because Jesus was such a tender and calm child who didn't cry at all, and Emanuela, which is the baby's name, is just channeling her inner Christmas Jesus baby.
Yes, like literally they had this like 2-day-old baby, or not even 2-day-old, a day-old baby in the house, and they're like trying to decide on a board game to play, like in one scene. It's like, no, I don't have kids, but I'm pretty sure that that's not how babies work.
No. So that leads us into our next question. This book raised some interesting questions about gender roles. As the author says in her bio page, she likes traditional gender roles, and that preference seems clear in the book. Do you feel like this was the author projecting or an accurate description of Amish life? Or honestly, do you just want to vent about all the sexism? Tillie, why don't you go
I just
first?
want to vent about all the sexism. There is a lot of celebration of traditional gender roles in this book, and I don't have a problem with that inherently, because I think if you happen to find contentment and joy in doing things that are socially assigned to your gender, more power to you. Like, I like a good number of traditionally feminine things myself. I get really happy baking and feeding people, but I'm not locked into those roles.
Mhm.
And the way that Amy Lillard portrays gender as an essentialist part of someone is just not right, morally or scientifically. So women get put on pedestals in this book. I don't know that they get put on pedestals in actual Amish culture, but there's stuff that comes out, like Levi looks over at Tillie and says, she was beautiful, he supposed, in the way that all pregnant women were. And, Tillie herself thinks at one point she was beginning to think that her baby would be a girl, and that made it all the more important for her to be among the Amish. The English world was just too rough on girls. Everything seemed to be a struggle and a fight. She knew people who thought that the Amish way of life was confining, but she considered it to be delineated. She thought that was the right word. Maybe outlined? She knew what she was supposed to do and where she was supposed to be. She knew how she was supposed to act, and she knew what she was supposed to wear. She knew what her job was, always. She should be a wife and a mother, and there was no need to be anything more. What was so wrong with that? Nothing, as far as she could see. Like, if you fit into the society's expectations, you are lucky. And if you're content with the way that labor is distributed between genders and in families and between generations, you are lucky. Because this situation doesn't allow much wiggle room. If she just wants to know where she fits in the world, and the English world was truly confusing and she didn't feel like she had a role or a purpose, I can understand why she would want to come back to the Amish. But it doesn't end here. There's all these implications that, like, the things that she's doing as a mother are completely inborn. Like, Levi is so impressed with the way that she just knows how to give birth, and she just knows how to feed the baby. She just knows how to hold the baby. And she passes this off as just pure maternal instinct, as if she didn't learn any of it by watching lots of other mothers and women in her community. And there's this implication that she says, she's like, well, how do you know how to, like, roof a house and plow a field? As if men come out of the womb and just instinctively look at a plot of ground and are like, yes, this needs to be in rows for planting. Like, these are things that are taught. So yeah, we could really go down a rabbit hole about gender as a construct and parenting and nature versus nurture and all sorts of things. But really what this boiled down to me was that I couldn't view her as empowered, even though she liked her own role, because the book framed it as if she had no other option biologically, and framed the English way of life, which happens to be my way of life, as confusing and grimy and dirty and horrible. Just like the worst thing that could happen to you is that you have to figure out what you want for yourself. and trying to determine what your own expectations is just a terrible thing. So we should just embrace the traditional roles that have been set up for us. And I am not here for that.
Yeah. And I would say, I think it's interesting that I actually highlighted that same quote that you read, because I was impressed that Tillie would want to enter this world with these, as she sees it, these confined roles, while also knowing that this same world will not allow her to return unless something completely out of her control, which is a man selects her. Like literally, she cannot return unless she comes with a husband. And as the book emphasizes, she has no control over either Melvin coming and marrying her or Levi. The only other thing I wanted to say with the gender roles here is that I feel like this is, as Amy Lillard pointed out, she took her ideas of what gender should be and placed it on the Amish community. I think it's an easy mistake is to look at the Amish and to see, look at the Amish and see what you want to see. I know we're all guilty of that at various times, if not with the Amish, but with other groups. But I think this is definitely especially the case. So while the Amish might have more traditional roles for men and women, it is not, I don't think, reflected in the way that they're portrayed in this novel. So how about you, Erin?
Yes, to everything you guys just said. There's a lot in this book. There was one character we haven't mentioned yet, and I was really frustrated with how she was portrayed, because in some ways I felt like she was the best female character in the book, and that is Levi's older sister, Mims. And in my opinion, she was doing everything right. She was checking in on him. She was making food for him. She was cleaning. She was making sure that he showed up to church and to a cousin's wedding and checking in with his parents. Like, she was just really caring for this brother who had just lost his wife and unborn child 2 months prior. And in exchange, she is called things like nosy and bossy, and even at one point a bully. At one point, she asks what I think is a very innocuous question of Levi: are you going to decorate for Christmas? And in Levi's thoughts, he says, oh, she's just being a busy, nosy, bossy, busybody, and also a sweetheart. And it's just, I mean, and maybe it's just a reflection of Levi's mindset, and I shouldn't read into like what this might actually say about how Mims was perceived, but I didn't like it because Mims seemed really cool. She was like 30. She was a member of the Amish church, but not married. Like, she was literally the best character.
Follow up on that, I noticed that I think your first instinct is right, because we see Tillie's perspective on Mims as well. And I highlighted something that annoyed me, because I highlighted something on every page that annoyed me. Actually, Mims was kind of unforgettable, like a young Eunice, forceful and in charge, yet somehow lovable all the same. And I really don't like the way that forceful and in charge are contrasted with lovable in a woman. So as if being an assertive personality or a competent personality is inherently unlovable if those traits are found in a woman.
We also, unfortunately, have to talk about racism along with sexism. And it's so unnecessary that we have to have this conversation, because the author says a line that I will read here in a minute on page 15 of the book. And this line stands out because it's ridiculous. But I, immediately upon reading it, I was like, oh, we're going to have a character of color. This is going to be a recurring character, because otherwise, why on earth would you give a name in this description? But no, this character is never mentioned again, which makes it all the more puzzling as to why this would be in this. I do feel like maybe we need to have like a trigger warning for a racial microaggression. There's no racial slurs or anything, but anyway, if you need to fast forward 30 seconds, please do. So on page 15, we get the line, Tyrone Getty had run the co-op for as long as Levi could remember. Like a lot of folks of color, it was impossible to tell exactly how old Tyrone was, followed by a description of Tyrone's gray hair, but a face with no wrinkles. So just, playing on several stereotypes of Black people that I was just really uncomfortable with this line. And again, this character is never mentioned again, so really no point to even including it. It's just really disappointing.
that leads us into our next question. Another factor in this book was a lot of people die or have recently died. So here is a short list. Levi's wife collapses of a brain aneurysm, which kills her and her unborn child. Levi's brother gets trampled by a bull. That happens in their childhood. Tillie's sister's husband dies. Tillie's other sister marries a widower who lost his wife and one of his children in a house fire. And then Tillie's other cousin also marries a widower. Basically, I want to ask, is being Amish deadly?
I mean, yeah, in this community, which as you mentioned in the intro is like 200 and like less than 300 people, like it appears that yes, like if you are in the way of someone's true love and their true love story, you are going to die. It also seemed like these people should be dealing with a lot more trauma than they were. But honestly, what happened is that the author wrote herself into a corner with this plot because, we have this situation where she's made it very clear that Tillie can't join the Amish church as an unwed single mother, but she's not supposed to end up with Melvin. She's supposed to end up with Levi. And so how are we going to get from point A to point B? So Melvin shows up, but then we can't have her end up with Melvin. The only option is Melvin must die.
And die he does.
And this happened in typical Amish romance fashion. This happened like 4 pages from the end, and I literally just put down my device and screamed. Like,
yeah, off page too. It's just like, oh, by the way, Melvin's dead.
Yeah. There's been an accident. Melvin's dead. That's all we get.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. It does seem like the Mississippi Amish are dealing with like unusual fatality rates. I do kind of want to say like maybe you should consider leaving, but I guess it had dramatic effect.
I think a lot, obviously, like all of these untimely demises has more to do with the fact that this is the 4th book in a series. And if you are very committed to the idea that marriage is for life, and that's a key part of your understanding of the Amish, then if you like the redemptive arc of second chances and whatnot, then you're going to have a lot of widows and widowers because you can't have divorces. And so I think it just means a lot of people are going to die, and they do. So
yes, indeed.
I think we need a special question just for to talk a little bit about the use of the name Tillie. So Tillie, why don't you talk about Tillie?
Okay. I'm always fairly pleased to come across Tillies in literature. I have a collection of books with Tillie characters.
But are you team Melvin or team Levi?
There is something I need to say about, which actually I think has less to do with Levi and more to do with very low expectations from Tillie, is that she's continually, her reason for being drawn to Levi and her reason for being compelled by him and interested in him romantically is that he's just so generous. And I just keep thinking, as I read the book, you have a really low bar for what generosity is. And it's a misunderstanding of like common Amish ethics. Like, she's so painfully grateful that Levi lets her sleep in his house and holds her hand while she's giving birth and gives her some diapers and baby clothing that he has in storage. Like, that's bare minimum to me. Like, this is an Amish community, okay? This is a community where like people pass around these things. This is what hand-me-downs are for in large families. He's just a paragon of generosity and kindness and consideration. And I'm here thinking like, this is bare minimum. Like, but I'm really upset on Tillie's behalf that she thinks she doesn't deserve more.
Well, to wrap up our discussion about An Amish Husband for Tillie, we are going to give it our ratings. And so for this system, we are going to use the term ladylike baby burps because, yes, not only does gender have some interesting implications, it also starts very, very early. So have no fear, this baby of Tillie's has very ladylike burps. So let's start with you, Tillie. How many ladylike baby burps would you give this book?
I'm going to go with half a burp. I'm going to go ladylike gurgle. Yeah, for me, even when there were small accuracies, I couldn't appreciate them because I was too overwhelmed with this agonizing situation that Tillie was in that did not make sense. And instead of making me feel sympathetic towards her, I just felt angry at this fictional bishop and angry at Tillie's low expectations and saddened by them. And when you add that to prose that's not particularly evocative and this gender essentialist stuff, I just can't find much redeemable in this book. So half star, half burp.
I'll at least give it a full burp, but this book was very stilted. It was a fast read. I think just sat down and read it one afternoon. And if there was one thing I liked in terms of the plot, it was that I thought when Melvin returned to the picture, I thought he was going to be depicted in a way that made me angry. But really, he was just depicted as a guy who didn't really want to return to the Amish, was willing to do the right thing if he had to. The right thing in this case, I guess, being marrying Tillie, even if he didn't want to. So it was more that he was depicted as just not the right guy for her. So I guess I'll give her that. But then he immediately got crushed by a tree. So I feel like Melvin was owed his own book. Like, you should have just let him go back to the English and find his true love. But yeah, this one was rough. Lots of problems.
Yeah. Maybe this probably has more to do with the manner in which I read it, but I'm actually going to give this 2 burps. Mostly, I wholeheartedly agree with all the criticisms, especially about the sexism. So the 3 of us have an extensive text conversation that goes back and forth. And when I was not that far into the book, Aaron and Tillie had finished it and revealed that there was a fascinating and shocking twist at the end. And that really motivated my reading through the whole book. And it just made the whole thing, because I knew something was coming. And so it was kind of fun to try to figure out what it was. And that is probably why I would give it a high rating. And I think the only other thing I would say is it was just really, the whole large family was really refreshing to see, because that has been missing in a lot of other books. So between that and the managing to kind of accurately portray this tiny, or at least somewhat accurately, at least in terms of what I could learn about the settlement in Mississippi, I think was enough to give it 2 out of 5 burps. But wholeheartedly agree on all the other issues. So that wraps up this week's discussion of An Amish Husband for Tillie by Amy Lillard. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Plain Wrong Pod. And you are always welcome to email us at plainwrongpod@gmail.com. We love to hear from you, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much for listening.